the dimly lit corridors of the state penitentiary, I've encountered the most twisted minds. As a criminal psychologist, I've been privy to the darkest corners of the human psyche. Tales of spectral apparitions, voices from the void, and otherworldly compulsions have all been laid bare before me. Most of these tales I've dismissed as mere manifestations of a fractured mind. But this was different. When a man tells me he murdered because a leprechaun whispered sinister commands into his ear, I don't see a mythical creature. I see a mind in turmoil, a soul lost in its own maze. But with him, with Ben, I felt a shiver down my spine, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the story itself, but the way he told it, the conviction in his eyes, the tremor in his voice. Ben wasn't your typical inmate. He was an esteemed professor, the head of the biology department at a reputable university. A man of science, logic, and reason. No history of mental illness, no traumatic past. Just a man with a story so bizarre it was almost believable. Ben, I began, my voice echoing slightly in the sterile room, tell me everything. He took a deep breath, his eyes distant. It began after the school year ended, our annual camping trip, a tradition, you see. Brian, Jake, Peter, and me. All of us, scholars of life, biology. Every year we'd venture into the heart of Canada's wilderness, a place untouched by civilization, a place where nature reigned supreme. He paused, lost in the memory. This year was different. We went deeper into the woods than ever before, to a secluded part of the lake, untouched by man. I'm a diver, you see. The thrill isn't in what you see, but in the experience of diving into waters where few have ventured. I leaned forward, intrigued. What did you find? His voice dropped to a whisper. It was on the second day. The water was murky, but as I swam further, a shadow loomed. At first, I thought it was debris, perhaps a sunken boat. But as I got closer, its enormity became clear. It wasn't natural. It wasn't of this world. He described an object, massive in size with a peculiar shape. A shaft protruding from its rear, ending in a fin that floated eerily below the water's surface. But what caught his attention was the front, a rounded structure like a cockpit with shattered glass. I tried to see inside, he continued, but it was pitch black. Whatever it was, it didn't belong there. It didn't belong to our world. I leaned back, processing his words. A sunken craft, an alien vessel, or the delusions of a broken mind. Whatever it was, this was just the beginning of Ben's tale. The vessel's design was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. Its sleek, metallic surface, the peculiar shape, and the eerie stillness that surrounded it all, pointed to one conclusion. This was not of our world. My heart raced as the realization hit me. I had stumbled upon a potential UFO, submerged in the depths of a remote Canadian lake. I needed a second opinion. Peter, another seasoned diver in our group, was my best bet. I shouldn't have been diving alone in the first place, and the discovery of this magnitude warranted a witness. When I described the vessel to him, his eyes widened with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Within minutes, we were paddling out to the location, eager to explore the mysterious craft together. The vessel, upon closer inspection, bore a resemblance to the B-2 Spirit, but its design was far more alien. It wasn't flat. Instead, it had a protruding underbelly, suggesting a cargo hold or perhaps something even more mysterious. As we circled the craft, Peter discovered an opening beneath what seemed to be its left wing. He was ready to venture inside, but I held him back. The setting sun and my dwindling air supply made it clear. We needed to return to the surface and plan our next move. That night, as we recounted our discovery to Jake and Brian, the atmosphere grew tense. Jake, always the conspiracy theorist, warned us of potential government involvement. If they know we've seen it, we're as good as dead, he whispered, his eyes darting around the campfire. We tried to lighten the mood with jokes about the alien pilot escaping and masquerading as the Queen of England, but the weight of our discovery hung over us. Sleep was elusive that night. Dawn broke, casting a golden hue over the lake. Peter and I, armed with fresh tanks, descended once more into the watery abyss. The entrance to the vessel was large enough for us to enter one by one. We tethered a rope to its exterior, a lifeline to guide us back should we lose our way in the alien maze. Inside, the vessel told a tale of two worlds. The exterior, pristine and untouched, contrasted sharply with the dilapidated interior. Aquatic plants clung to the walls, and fish darted in and out of crevices. How could something that looked so new on the outside appear so ancient within? We navigated through what seemed to be a cargo hold, eventually finding an entrance to an engine room. The machinery was foreign, intricate, and blocked by debris. We pressed on, swimming through a narrow corridor that led us to a ladder. Above, a hatch beckoned. We tried to open it, but it remained stubbornly shut. It was only when I spotted a lever, hidden in the shadows, that hope was rekindled. I pulled it, hearing the mechanical release and watching as a flurry of bubbles erupted around us. Yet the hatch remained sealed. The mystery deepened. What secrets did this vessel hold? And were we truly prepared for the truths that lay within? The hatch resisted our efforts, but Peter, ever the resourceful one, drew his diving knife. With precision, he wedged it into the hatch's edge, leveraging it open just enough for our fingers to find purchase. Together, we strained against the weight of the hatch until it yielded, revealing the cockpit beyond. The sight that awaited us was beyond comprehension. Peter, always the more adventurous of us, swam ahead, circling a large central chair. Suddenly, he recoiled, his eyes wide with shock. His mouthpiece slipped from his grasp, and he gestured frantically, miming the act of flying a plane and firing machine guns. It took me a moment to grasp his meaning. The pilot was still there. With trepidation, I approached the chair, Peter trailing behind. The being seated there was unmistakably alien. Its head was enlarged, its limbs elongated, and its skin bore no signs of decay, despite the apparent age of the vessel. The reality of our discovery was overwhelming. We had found a genuine extraterrestrial. We needed to talk, to process what we'd seen. We surfaced, the weight of our discovery pressing down on us. After the initial shock, we debated our next steps. The idea of keeping such a monumental secret was quickly dismissed, but as we discussed, an audacious plan began to form in my mind. "We need to take it back to our lab," I declared. "We need to study it." Peter looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. "How do you propose we get an alien body across the border?" I laid out my plan, detailing how we'd pack the body in ice, conceal it within our canoe, and transport it in our cargo van. The van's unique design would allow us to hide the canoe and its otherworldly cargo beneath the rear bench seat. When we returned to shore, Jake and Brian's reactions were as expected, a mix of shock, disbelief, and morbid curiosity. I reiterated our plan, emphasizing the need for haste. "You have your own lab?" I was asked, a hint of skepticism in the voice. "It's a rented space in a warehouse," I explained. "We use it for our own experiments and sometimes for student assignments, but now it'll serve a far greater purpose." With the alien body concealed and our equipment packed, we began our journey back to the lab, driven by a mix of fear, curiosity, and the weight of responsibility. The implications of our discovery were vast, and the road ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear: we were on the cusp of something monumental. The atmosphere in the van was thick with tension. Jake, always the worrier, was on the brink of hysteria. "If they search the van at the border, we're done for," he whispered, his voice quivering. Brian, ever the pragmatist, tried to calm him. "Stay quiet. Let the driver do the talking, and we'll be fine." The debate raged on, but the decision was clear. We were taking this extraterrestrial being back to our lab. We left behind non-essentials, focusing only on our otherworldly cargo. The drive to the border was agonizingly slow, every moment stretching into an eternity. Jake's anxiety was palpable, and every vehicle pulled aside for inspection sent him into a fresh wave of panic. But by some miracle, we crossed without incident. The collective sigh of relief was almost audible. Upon reaching our lab, we wasted no time. The alien body was carefully transferred to an examination table, and we ensured every possible point of entry was locked and secured. The gravity of our actions weighed on us. We were about to perform an unauthorized autopsy on a being from another world. The risks were immense, but the potential discoveries were too tantalizing to resist. We began documenting our findings, the camera capturing every detail. The creature's anatomy was both familiar and alien. Its chest lacked a central sternum, instead having two large bones on either side. Our first incision revealed a fascinating internal landscape. Organs that bore a resemblance to our own, yet were arranged differently. The lungs were filled with water, suggesting the creature had drowned, but there was no sign of trauma, casting doubt on our initial crash theory. The creature's brain was a marvel. Triangular, almost pyramid-like, it sat nestled within the skull. But it was the discovery of an unknown gland pulsating slowly that truly astounded us. Brian was the first to notice its rhythmic beating. "It's still alive," he whispered in awe. Touching it, I felt a pulse, and a silvery substance coated my gloves. This gland was secreting a fluid, metallic in appearance, reminiscent of mercury but lacking its luster. Intrigued, I extracted some of the substance with a syringe. The room was thick with anticipation. We were on the brink of a discovery that could change the world. But with every revelation came more questions. What was this creature? Why was it here? And what secrets did its alien biology hold? The answers lay before us, waiting to be uncovered. The vial containing the silvery substance sat on the lab table, its contents shimmering dully under the fluorescent lights. Was it the alien's blood? Or something even more extraordinary? The next morning, our questions multiplied. The incision I'd made on the extraterrestrial's torso was healing at an unprecedented rate. We were astounded. How could a wound of such magnitude heal in mere hours? Our eyes turned to the vial. The mysterious fluid from the still-functioning gland seemed to be the only logical explanation. We needed to test our theory, to understand the true nature of this alien elixir. Our experiments began with lab mice. The initial results were both startling and horrifying. The mice, after being injected with the substance, seemed to die. But death was not the end for them. They returned to life, but not as they were. Their behavior was aggressive, rabid. They turned on their fellow mice with a ferocity we'd never witnessed. Our attempts to euthanize them using conventional methods were futile. The toxin that had always worked before had no effect on these altered creatures. It was only after a direct puncture to their skulls that they were finally stilled. Peter, ever the thinker, proposed a new experiment. We'd inject more mice but keep them isolated. I agreed, and we proceeded, watching as the effects of the fluid manifested once more. To further test our healing hypothesis, we decided to remove the gland from the alien cadaver. After extracting more of the fluid, we made another incision on its body. Hours passed, and the wound remained unchanged, confirming our suspicions. This fluid was the source of the creature's remarkable regenerative abilities. But there was a darker side to our discovery. Upon examining one of the euthanized mice, we found its internal organs in a state of severe atrophy, as if it had been dead for hours. Yet its brain was saturated with the silvery fluid. It was as if the substance had kept the brain active, albeit at a rudimentary level. The implications were staggering. This fluid had the power to heal, to reanimate, but at what cost? The line between life and death had been blurred, and we stood at the precipice of a discovery that could change the world. But with every revelation came more questions, and the weight of our responsibility grew heavier. We were in uncharted territory, and the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. The lab was thick with tension, the weight of our discoveries pressing down on us. The mice, once simple test subjects, had become harbingers of something far more sinister. While two had turned rabid, the third remained unaffected, a mystery that deepened our intrigue. But our pursuit of knowledge took a dark turn when Peter, in a moment of carelessness, was bitten by the unaffected mouse. The creature's escape was a blow to our research, but Peter's rapidly deteriorating condition became our immediate concern. His skin turned ashen, and his thumb, where the bite had pierced, looked grotesque. The coughing fits that racked his body were a clear sign that the alien fluid was wreaking havoc within him. Jake, sensing the urgency, offered to take Peter to the hospital. But Peter, ever the dedicated scientist, refused. His commitment to our work, even in the face of personal peril, was both admirable and terrifying. In Peter's absence, Brian's obsession with the fluid grew. His suggestions became increasingly radical, even suggesting we test on larger animals, or, chillingly, a human subject. I recoiled at the thought. We were scientists, not monsters. But Brian's argument was seductive. If the fluid worked on humans, it could revolutionize medicine. Diseases could be eradicated, wounds healed in moments. The potential was staggering, but the risks were undeniable. Peter's condition was a testament to the fluid's unpredictable nature. I argued that Peter was our inadvertent human test subject, but Brian was insistent. A true test required a full injection, not just a bite. As we debated, the gravity of our situation became clear. We had stumbled upon something beyond our understanding, a substance that could heal or destroy. The line between ethical research and dangerous obsession was blurring, and we were treading on dangerous ground. The choices we made in the coming hours would define us, for better or worse. The lab was a cauldron of tension, every shadow seeming to dance with the secrets we had uncovered. Brian's sudden absence from the lounge room sent a shiver down my spine. When we found him in the lab, the scene was chilling. A tourniquet tightly wound around his arm, the silver fluid coursing into his veins. His eyes, once filled with scientific curiosity, now held a wild, desperate look. Jake, always the voice of reason, tried to make sense of the situation. Drawing from his expertise in virology, he postulated that the fluid was acting like a virus, albeit one unlike anything we'd ever seen. It wasn't just infecting Brian, it was changing him. By the witching hour, the transformation was undeniable. Brian, once a man of average height, now towered over us. His body was a canvas of grotesque changes, the most disturbing of which was his left hand, now a gnarled, monstrous claw. It was as if the fluid was rewriting his very essence. Despite the horror show playing out before us, exhaustion, that cruel mistress, took hold. We succumbed to a fitful sleep, our dreams haunted by silver liquids and monstrous transformations. Dawn's light brought no relief. Brian lay still, a shell of the man he once was. But as Jake leaned in, the nightmare took a terrifying turn. With a speed that defied logic, Brian's newly formed claws shot out, wrapping around Jake's throat. The restraints we'd placed on him, thinking they'd keep us safe, shattered like glass. We were in the presence of a creature of our own making, and it was hungry. The scene was a macabre dance of violence and chaos. Brian, transformed into a grotesque version of his former self, took a savage bite out of Jake's shoulder, the sound of tearing flesh echoing in the sterile lab. In a display of his newfound monstrous strength, he effortlessly snapped Jake's neck. The horror of the moment was palpable, and I felt a primal urge to flee. I darted towards the lounge, my mind racing. Hidden there was a .45 caliber pistol, a precaution we'd taken for the late nights at the docks, which often attracted unsavory characters. The room was shrouded in darkness, and I crouched behind the desk, my heart pounding. The sound of Brian's heavy, uneven footsteps grew louder, each step a grim reminder of the monster he'd become. The door creaked open, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. Suddenly, the desk was lifted into the air with an ease that defied belief. Brian's monstrous claw gripped it, his tattered clothes barely covering his decaying skin. For a brief moment he froze, as if battling with the remnants of his humanity. Seizing the opportunity, I crawled out from behind him and sprinted towards the exit. The sound of the desk crashing against the wall echoed behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Bursting out into the marina, the early morning sun blinded me momentarily. The docks were bustling with activity, people prepping their boats for the day. My desperate shouts caught their attention, but it was the sight of Brian, his face a mangled mess from my shots, that sent them into a panic. Running on pure adrenaline, I returned to the lab, knowing that Jake, too, had been infected. As I entered, he was already beginning to rise, his transformation underway. Without hesitation, I fired 2 shots, ensuring he wouldn't become another monster. The aftermath was a blur. The police arrived swiftly, their commands echoing in my ears. But the real shock came days later when men in crisp suits, undoubtedly from the FBI, took over the case. They demanded all evidence, but little did they know I had secured a copy of the tape elsewhere. My instincts told me this was bigger than any of us could have imagined. Determined to uncover the truth, I visited the docks a week later. The sight of hazmat-suited figures entering the sealed-off warehouse confirmed my suspicions. Whatever had been unleashed that day, The government was now deeply involved, and the truth was being buried deeper than any lake. The docks, now swarming with shadowy figures, were a far cry from the bustling marina I remembered. I had to resort to binoculars, keeping my distance lest I be intercepted by the stern-faced mercenaries patrolling the area. Their presence was a clear sign that something was amiss. My next stop was the hospital. I had a few contacts there, and the ER doctor, a friend of mine, recounted the chilling tale of Peter's last moments. He described how, after being declared dead, Peter had suddenly reanimated, thrashing and snarling like a wild animal. The scene was chaotic, with nurses and security personnel trying to restrain him. One nurse, in a desperate attempt to calm him, was bitten. A security guard, in sheer panic, had struck Peter with an oxygen tank, ending his second life. That nurse, traumatized by the event, resigned and vanished without a trace. The mystery deepened when I learned that Peter's medical records had been wiped clean. Such an act would require influence from the highest echelons of power. My search then led me to the campsite, the very place where this nightmare had begun. The once serene location was now barricaded, with ominous warning signs threatening potential trespassers with lethal force. The transformation of the site was a testament to the gravity of what had transpired there. As for Ben, he had vanished into thin air. His records, like Peter's, had been erased, and all traces of his existence, including his social media, had been scrubbed clean. The same fate had befallen the others. It was as if they had never existed. The chilling realization dawned on me. They had been silenced, their stories buried deep, never to see the light of day. But one loose end continued to haunt me. The mouse that had escaped. Was it still out there, carrying the deadly secret within its genes? Or had the shadowy government operatives managed to capture it? If they hadn't, the implications were terrifying. History had shown that the deadliest pandemics often began with the smallest of carriers. And if that mouse was still at large, it could very well be the harbinger of a catastrophe unlike any the world had ever seen.